My dad's funeral smelled like fresh flowers and motor oil. That was fitting. Robert Chen spent 30 years building Chen's auto repair from a single-bay garage on Maple Street into the most trusted mechanic shop in our town. He fixed cars for free when customers couldn't afford the bill. The people who came to bury him hadn't forgotten that. I was 18, standing at his grave in a black dress that was too tight because I'd grown since the last time I needed it. My mom, Linda, stood beside me, shaking so hard I could feel it through her arm. She hadn't slept properly in 4 days. Before I continue, if this story means something to you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only if you genuinely want to stay until the end. And wherever you're watching from, drop a comment with your city and what time it is there. I'd love to know who's listening. The service was almost over when my Uncle Victor stepped forward. He didn't ask anyone. He just walked to the front, straightened his tie, and cleared his throat like he was opening a business meeting. Robert would have wanted me to keep things running, he said loudly. The shop, the accounts, I'll be managing everything going forward. Nobody said a word. My mom nodded slowly. But I noticed where Victor's eyes moved. Not to my father's grave. To the nearby business owners standing in the crowd. He was already calculating. That was the moment I should have understood exactly what was coming. My dad built Chen's auto with his own hands. He arrived in this country at 22 years old with $400 and a toolbox his father had given him. He rented a space barely big enough for 2 cars, slept on a cot in the back for 2 years, and refused to quit even when 3 larger shops opened nearby. By the time I was born, he had 8 employees, a full paint booth, and a waiting list 3 weeks long. He was known for 2 things: honest prices and never turning away a car that needed help, even when the owner was short on money. He kept handwritten records of everything. Every customer, every repair, every dollar. 3 thick notebooks per year, lined up on a shelf in his office like encyclopedias. Uncle Victor was his younger brother. He showed up at the shop maybe 4 times a year, always smiling, always needing something: money, tools, sometimes the shop's truck, and always promising to pay it back. My dad never said a bad word about him. Not once. Victor just needs more time to find his way, Dad always said. I was 12 when I first noticed Victor never actually found his way. He just kept borrowing from people who were too kind to say no. My dad was the kindest person I have ever known. That kindness is what Victor was counting on. Even after Dad was gone. My dad died on a Tuesday. Heart attack. He was 54 years old, working late the way he always did. Marcus, his longest-serving employee, found him on the floor beside a car he'd been fixing. The ambulance came. It wasn't enough. He had a will. I knew about it because he told me himself the summer before I turned 17. We were eating lunch on the shop steps when he got quiet in that serious way he had. "Everything goes to you and your mom," he said. "Equally. The shop, the building, all of it. Mr. Hartley has the paperwork." Mr. Hartley was my dad's lawyer. He'd handled the will for years. 3 weeks after the funeral, Victor came to our house with a folder. He sat at our kitchen table, folded his hands carefully, and slid the folder toward my mom. "Robert updated his will last year," Victor said. "He left the business to me. He wanted someone with business experience handling it." My mom stared at the paper without speaking. I stared at Victor's hands. They were completely still. Too still. The kind of stillness that takes practice to learn. "When did he do this?" I asked. Victor smiled. "He didn't tell you everything, Maya." He said it gently, like he was doing us a favor by explaining it. I looked at my mom. She was nodding slowly, her eyes far away somewhere. And just like that, Victor stepped into everything my father had built. My mom didn't fight it. "I want you to understand what grief does to a person before you judge her for that." Linda Chen had been married to my father for 26 years. She woke up next to him every morning. She packed his lunch daily, even though he always told her she didn't have to. She knew the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway the way some people know their own heartbeat. When he died, something in her went very quiet. She sat in his chair at the kitchen table for 2 weeks straight. She held his coffee mug like it still had warmth in it. She answered the phone when she had to and went through the slow, heavy motions of eating, sleeping, and nodding when people spoke to her. When Victor placed that folder in front of her, she studied it for a long time. "He really wanted this?" she asked softly. "He was worried about leaving you with the pressure of managing a business," Victor said. His voice was careful and gentle and perfectly practiced. He wanted to protect you both. She nodded. I grabbed the document and read every single line. It looked official. It had my dad's signature. It had a notary stamp dated 14 months before he died. But something felt deeply wrong. My dad told me things. We talked about everything that mattered to him. He had never once mentioned this. Not a single word. Victor moved fast. Within 2 weeks of showing us that document, he had his name added to the shop's business bank account. Within a month, he was parking his car in my dad's reserved spot. By 60 days, he had replaced the handwritten sign above the garage door with a printed one. It still said Chen's Auto. But it felt completely different inside. He kept 4 of my dad's 8 employees. Marcus was among the 4, which surprised me. The others he let go with small checks and firm handshakes at the door. My dad's handwritten notebooks, 3 per year going back 30 years, disappeared from the office shelf. Victor said he had reorganized the filing system. I went to see Mr. Hartley, my dad's original lawyer. He met me and looked uncomfortable from the moment I sat down across from him. The newer will replaces the one I prepared, he said quietly. I reviewed the document Victor presented. It appears legitimate. Appears, I said. He chose his next words very carefully. I have no formal reason to challenge it, Maya. The notary stamp is valid. The signatures were reviewed. But you think something is wrong, I said. He looked down at his desk without answering directly. Your father was a very careful man who communicated clearly with the people he loved. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. I made a decision that same night. I was sitting on the floor of my dad's small workshop in our backyard, the one where he taught me to change oil when I was 9 years old. I was turning one of his old wrenches over in my hands, making myself think clearly instead of just feeling. I was 18. I had no money, no lawyer, and no hard proof. Victor had a signed will, a notary stamp, and 60 days of legal momentum behind him. If I walked into a courtroom right then, I would lose badly. So I didn't go to a courtroom. I went back to school instead. I enrolled in a business administration program at the community college, the one that offered night classes in accounting and basic contract law. I worked morning shifts at a diner nearby to cover my fees. I also took a part-time job at Chen's Auto. Victor didn't see me as a threat. I was just his dead brother's daughter, looking for connection to her father. He let me answer phones and handle customer check-ins 3 days a week. He probably thought it was a kind gesture on his part. He was wrong. I wasn't there to feel close to my dad. I was there to study how Victor was running everything my dad had built, and to find the very first crack in his story. I was going to be patient. I was going to be thorough. And I was going to finish what I started. I was careful about everything. I showed up on time, every single shift. I smiled at customers. I learned every employee's name and brought coffee on cold mornings. I asked questions that sounded like general curiosity and listened like my life depended on the answers. Victor actually liked having me there more than he expected. I think it made him feel generous. It gave him something to say at family events. I'm looking after Robert's girl. But I was watching everything closely. The customers first. My dad had built a loyal base over 30 years. Within 6 months of Victor taking over, familiar faces stopped coming in. When I asked one of them, Mr. Patterson, who had been bringing his trucks since before I was born, he shook his head slowly. Prices went up, he said. And nobody ever calls you back anymore. Then I began watching the records. Victor used digital files now, no more handwritten notebooks. He gave me access to the scheduling system, not the financial accounts. But I had been studying accounting for 4 months by then, and I could see the edges of problems even without full access. The labor charges being billed to customers didn't match what the mechanics described actually doing. Small differences. $50 here. $80 there. Sometimes more. I wrote every single discrepancy down in my own notebook at home with dates and names. Marcus had been with my dad for 19 years. He was a quiet man. Heavy-set, with engine grease permanently worked into the lines of his hands and the kind of calm that comes from 2 decades of solving problems under pressure. He had been at the shop since I was a baby. He once taught me to check tire pressure when I was 7, patient as a teacher, never rushing me. After Victor took over, Marcus kept his head down. He did his work, said very little, and went home. I started eating lunch outside on the same bench he used. Just the 2 of us and our sandwiches, without much talk at first. We covered nothing topics for 3 weeks. Cars. Weather. the football team he followed every season. Then one quiet Wednesday I told him what I was doing. Not all of it. Just enough. I think the will was forged, I said, keeping my voice low. I believe Victor knew the shop's full value long before my dad died and planned this carefully. Marcus set his sandwich down. He looked at the building for a long, still moment. Your dad told me something, he said finally. About 4 months before he passed. He said Victor had been asking questions about what the building was worth. What the business would sell for if someone wanted to buy it. He paused. Your dad told him it wasn't for sale. Said Victor went quiet after that. He picked up his sandwich again. I wondered when you'd start asking questions, he said. Marcus became my most important ally. He never did anything dramatic about it. He didn't confront Victor or risk his job. He just started remembering things out loud when we were alone at that bench. He remembered that Victor had visited the shop 3 separate times in the last year of my dad's life, always on days when my dad was out at the bank or a supplier meeting. Always asking the same types of questions. What the equipment was worth, who handled the financial accounts, whether the building was owned outright or still under a lease. He remembered that one of those visits happened on a Tuesday in October, roughly 2 months before the date stamped on the new will. And he remembered that my dad came back to the shop late that same afternoon and stayed unusually quiet for the rest of the day. Not his normal quiet, Marcus said carefully. Bothered quiet. Like something was sitting wrong with him. I wrote all of it down. Then I asked Marcus something important. I had a photo of the contested will saved on my phone from the day Victor first showed it to us. The notary who had stamped it was named Patricia Muse. Marcus nodded slowly when I said the name. Victor had a girlfriend for a stretch, he said. A year or 2 back. She worked at some kind of document processing office. He looked at me steadily. Her name was Patty. My face stayed calm. But my heart was going very fast. I need to stop here for a moment. Because I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, why didn't you just go to the police immediately? Why not call a lawyer, report the will, make some kind of noise right away? Here's the honest answer. I was 18 years old. I had a photograph on a cracked phone screen and a conversation on a bench with a mechanic. No court was going to act on that. Victor had official paperwork, a notary stamp, and 60 days of uncontested legal control already behind him. I had a feeling in a notebook. I needed something real. Something solid that couldn't simply be explained away. And I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever watched someone take what rightfully belonged to you? Not just a thing, but something representing everything a person you loved had worked their whole life to build, and had to stand there quietly because you simply weren't ready to fight yet? I genuinely want to know. Drop a comment and share your story. Because right then, 2 years into gathering information, I nearly stopped. I sat in my car in the shop parking lot one Thursday evening and cried until my chest actually hurt. Then I thought about my dad at 22 sleeping on a cot in that back room. I wiped my face. I drove home. And I started researching Patricia Muse. Patricia Muse wasn't difficult to locate. She had a small listing on a local business directory. Notary services, document processing, mobile appointments available. She had worked at a documentation company called QuickSeal Solutions on Grant Avenue for 6 years before it permanently closed. I went to QuickSeal's old address. A cell phone store occupied the space now. I asked the owner if he knew where the staff had gone when QuickSeal closed down. He shrugged. I think some of them moved to the county clerk's office. I went to the county clerk's office. Patricia Muse no longer worked there, but a woman named Janet, who had worked alongside her at QuickSeal, still did. I didn't ask Janet about the will directly. I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. Instead, I filed a formal public records request. It was something Mr. Hartley had actually mentioned during our meeting, without realizing he was giving me useful information. Any person named as a party in an estate could request the official notarization log for documents connected to that estate. I was named in my father's estate, which gave me the legal right to see every document Patricia Muse had ever notarized connected to our family. 3 weeks later, the log arrived in my mailbox in a plain envelope. The will Victor presented was stamped on March 14th. Patricia Muse had not logged a single appointment that entire week. I sat at my kitchen table and read through the log 4 complete times. Then I photographed every single page, emailed copies to myself, and made 2 printed sets. One for my own folder at home and one I gave to Marcus to keep somewhere safe and separate. The notary stamp on Victor's will was dated March 14th. Patricia Muse's official log showed she had been admitted to a hospital on March 13 and discharged on March 17 for a scheduled medical procedure. The log had a complete gap that entire stretch. No entries, no clients, no signed appointments. She hadn't notarized a single document that entire week. She couldn't have. Someone had used her professional stamp without her knowledge. Either that or someone had pressured her into staying silent about it. Either way, the notarization on Victor's will was fraudulent. I had real, documentable proof now. But I still needed one more piece. I needed to establish what the legitimate will actually said. The original one Mr. Hartley had prepared, the one my dad described on those shop steps when I was 17. Victor had never claimed that will didn't exist. He simply said it had been replaced by the newer one. I called Mr. Hartley. The original will is still in your records, I said. Lawyers are legally required to keep client documents for 7 years. A long pause filled the line. Yes, he said quietly. It is. I need a certified copy, I said. And I think you've been waiting for me to ask. Mr. Hartley met me in a coffee shop 2 blocks from his office. He came alone. He carried a sealed envelope and wore the expression of someone who had been carrying something heavy for far too long. He placed the envelope carefully on the table between us. I should have acted 2 years ago, he said. But without clear evidence of fraud, I had no legal grounds to formally challenge the document Victor presented. Filing a baseless challenge would have cost your mother money she didn't have and almost certainly failed. But now, I said, now you have the notary log. He folded his hands. That changes the entire picture. Inside the envelope was a certified copy of my father's original will, prepared 4 years before he died. It was clear and straightforward, exactly the way my dad did everything. The shop, the building, all accounts and every associated asset, divided equally between my mother Linda Chen and me Maya Chen. Victor wasn't mentioned anywhere. Not even once. Mr. Hartley also handed me a second document. A signed personal statement, handwritten carefully, describing every conversation he'd had with Victor after my father's death, including the moment Victor had quietly pressured him not to complicate the process, by raising questions about the updated will. I looked up slowly. You were afraid of him. Mr. Hartley nodded once. I'm genuinely sorry for that. He meant it. I could tell. I found Ms. Okafor through a legal aid office connected to my community college. She was an estate attorney who had spent 12 years handling exactly this kind of situation. Disputed wills, forged documents, family fraud. She was in her early 40s, sharp, direct, and clearly not impressed by people who thought intimidation was a strategy. When I spread everything across her desk, the notary log, Mr. Hartley's signed statement, my personal notebooks, Marcus's written account of Victor's visits, and the certified original will, she read through all of it without saying a single word. Then she looked up. How long did it take you to gather all of this? She said. Almost 3 years, I told her. She looked back at the documents. How old are you now? 21. She was quiet briefly. Your father built that business for 30 years. Yes. And your uncle has been running it for 3. Yes. Badly, I added. She almost smiled. I can see that clearly from the tax records you pulled. She straightened the papers into a neat stack. Maya, I want to be completely honest with you. Fraud cases are winnable. But they aren't fast and they won't be quiet. Victor will fight this hard. I know, I said. When he realizes what you've built against him, he'll get scared. Good, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she opened a fresh folder and picked up her pen. Ms. Okafor filed the challenge on a Monday morning. The legal term was a will contest on grounds of fraud and forgery. It named Victor Chen as the respondent and presented 3 primary pieces of evidence. The gap in Patricia Muse's notary log, Mr. Hartley's sworn personal statement, and the original certified will my father had prepared. Victor found out by Thursday. I know because he called my mom first. I was at the house when the phone rang. My mom looked at the screen, then looked at me and handed it over without answering. Why? Victor's voice was completely different now. The warm, generous uncle tone had disappeared entirely. What was underneath it was flat and cold. What exactly do you think you're doing? Exactly what it looks like, I said calmly. You are a child. You don't understand how these things actually work. Drop this now before you embarrass yourself and cause your mother further pain. I thought about my dad saying Victor just needed more time to find his way. I understand perfectly, I said. Your lawyer can contact Ms. Okafor. I hung up. My mom was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had heard enough. Laya, she said quietly. Show me everything. I sat her down at the kitchen table and opened my full folder. She didn't speak for nearly 40 minutes. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet, not from sadness, but from something that looked a great deal like relief. Victor hired a lawyer named Douglas Price. He came from a firm downtown with glass entry doors and a receptionist who answered before the second ring. Price sent Ms. Okafor a formal letter within a week, stating that our will contest was entirely frivolous and motivated purely by personal grievance. Ms. Okafor forwarded it to me with one sentence underneath. He's worried. Worried lawyers get loud. Price's defense rested on two main arguments. First, that the gap in the notary log proved nothing. Muse could have simply made a clerical error in her own records. Second, that my dad had used a separate independent document service to execute the updated will, and that our family simply hadn't been informed of this. We had expected both of those arguments. What we had not expected was what happened next with Patricia Muse herself. Ms. Okafor tracked her down. She was living 2 towns over, working at a local grocery store. When Ms. Okafor calmly explained the situation, that her notary stamp had been used on a date she was confirmed to be hospitalized, Muse went completely quiet for a very long time. Then she said, I reported my stamp stolen 2 years ago. Someone broke into my car. I filed a full report with the notary board. Ms. Okafor called me that same evening. I could hear something different in her voice this time. Certainty. He stole her stamp, I said. He stole her stamp, she confirmed. The stolen stamp report changed everything. Patricia Muse had filed a police report 2 years after my dad's death, when she discovered during a routine audit that her professional notary stamp was missing. At the time, nobody had connected it to any specific forged document. It was just a stolen stamp, an inconvenient problem, not yet understood as part of something larger. But now we could make that connection clearly. The date of the reported theft fell within a 2-week window that directly included March 14th, the exact date stamped on Victor's forged will. Ms. Okafor filed a supplemental brief immediately. She also formally contacted the County Fraud Division. This was no longer only a civil dispute about a contested will. It had become a criminal matter. Someone had stolen a notary stamp and used it to forge a legal document in order to seize control of a business worth, at current market valuation, approximately $420,000. Victor was called in for formal questioning. Ms. Okafor described it to me afterward. He had maintained his story consistently. Said he knew nothing about any stolen stamp. Said my father had genuinely wanted him in charge of the business. Said our family was simply grieving and looking for someone to hold responsible. The detective listened politely to all of it. Then asked Victor to explain why his fingerprints were found on the storage case that Patricia Muse had submitted along with her original theft report. Victor had no answer ready. The night after Victor's questioning, someone left a note on my mom's car. It was tucked under the windshield wiper, handwritten on a plain piece of paper. Drop the case. You don't know what you're starting. My mom photographed it immediately and sent the image directly to both Ms. Okafor and the detective handling the fraud investigation. She didn't shake while she did it. She moved with the steady calm of someone documenting something important. I think fighting this battle together had given her something back that grief had slowly taken. Ms. Okafor told us to stay calm and let it work in our favor. Innocent people don't threaten witnesses, she said. He's telling us exactly how scared he is right now. Marcus called me that same evening. He had been approached at the shop that afternoon by an unfamiliar man who casually asked whether Marcus had been talking to anyone about shop business lately. Marcus told him no, waited until he was safely in his car and called me immediately. I passed the information straight to Ms. Okafor. She filed for formal witness protection measures through the civil court, a standard legal step that placed everything Marcus had documented onto the official record immediately, protecting his testimony from any later attempt to pressure or discredit him. Victor's lawyer filed an objection. The judge denied it without comment. For the first time since my dad's funeral, something had moved in our direction inside an actual courtroom. I allowed myself 60 seconds to feel that. Then I went back to preparing. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in October. Almost exactly 5 years after my dad died. Ms. Okafor worked in her office until past midnight most nights in the 2 weeks before the hearing. I was there with her for most of it, reviewing documents, organizing the evidence timeline, and preparing for every possible angle Victor's lawyer might try. She brought in a forensic document examiner named Dr. Elaine Cross. Dr. Cross had spent 22 years analyzing handwriting and signatures for courts across the state. She had testified in over 300 cases and had never been successfully challenged on her core conclusions. She examined Victor's contested will alongside 3 confirmed samples of my dad's verified signature, from bank documents, business licenses, and a letter he had written to the city council the year before his death. Her conclusion was 8 detailed pages long. The signature on the contested will showed pressure patterns, letter spacing and pen angle inconsistencies that did not match any of the verified samples in her analysis. In her professional opinion, the signature had been carefully copied, most likely traced from an existing document and then replicated freehand. Can you explain that in plain, simple language? Ms. Okafor asked her during a preparation session. Dr. Cross didn't hesitate. Someone practiced Robert Chen's signature and then faked it. I can show the court precisely where the differences are visible. I thought about my dad's handwriting, big, careful letters, always pressing too hard with the pen because he had learned to write late in life. You cannot truly fake the things that make a person exactly who they are. The evening before the hearing, I drove to the shop. Not to go inside. Just to park across the street and look at it quietly. It was late afternoon. The light came in low and golden, the same way it did on summer evenings when I was a small girl. When my dad sometimes let me sit on the front counter and pretend to answer the phones while he worked in the bays behind me. The sign still said Chen's Auto. But 4 of the service bays sat empty on a Thursday afternoon. My dad never had a single empty bay. Marcus had told me business had dropped over 40% since Victor took control. The loyal customers who had trusted my dad for decades had slowly found other shops. Victor had replaced them with low-margin fleet contracts that kept money moving without building anything lasting. My dad would have been heartbroken to see it. I sat in my car and I talked to him. I don't know if that sounds unusual to you. I didn't care what it sounded like. I told him everything I had found, everything I had done, and what was going to happen the next morning. Then I said, I kept your records. Every single detail. The early evening traffic moved around me. I drove home. I got 8 solid hours of sleep. In the morning I put on a navy blue dress and made myself a proper breakfast. Some things deserved to be done right. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. Wood-paneled walls. Tall windows letting in pale morning light. A judge named Honorable Patricia Wren who wore reading glasses and took notes by hand throughout the proceedings. Victor sat at the respondent's table in a carefully pressed gray suit. He looked calm, or he was working hard to appear calm. His hands were flat on the table surface, the same position they'd been in at our kitchen table 5 years ago when he slid that forged document toward my mother. His lawyer, Douglas Price, arrived with a large organized stack of folders. He carried the polished confidence that expensive attorneys practice until it looks completely natural. Ms. Okafor brought 1 folder. She didn't need more than that. My mom sat beside me in the gallery. Marcus was there. Mr. Hartley was there. Dr. Cross sat quietly with her report. Patricia Muse sat in the 3rd row, small and straight-backed, with a signed statement ready to deliver to the court. Judge Wren called the proceedings to order. Price went first. His argument was smooth and well-rehearsed. He spoke about my father's deep trust in his brother. He raised questions about my age and limited experience. He suggested carefully that grief could distort a young person's memory and that a grieving teenager might sincerely believe things that simply weren't accurate. He never once looked directly at me. I kept my full attention on the judge. She was writing steadily. Then Ms. Okafor stood up. She didn't begin with the notary log. She didn't open with the fingerprints or the forensic signature analysis. He started with my father. She told the court who Robert Chen was, not in a sentimental way but in a completely factual way. She described the business he built from nothing, the careful records he maintained for 30 years, the will he had legally prepared, and the long series of documented conversations between him and Mr. Hartley spanning 14 years of professional relationship. She was describing a man who was methodical, careful, and always clear about his intentions. Robert Chen communicated openly with his lawyer, his employees, and his daughter about his estate planning, she said steadily. He communicated with everyone, except the one person who claims to have benefited most from a sudden change to that plan. She paused and let it settle in the room. Then she presented the evidence in clean, logical order. The original certified will, confirmed by Mr. Hartley. The notary log showing Patricia Muse was hospitalized on the date of the alleged notarization. The official theft report for Muse's stolen stamp, with its documented timestamp. The forensic signature analysis by Dr. Cross. 8 pages concluding clearly that the signature was not authentic. And finally, the fingerprint findings. Victor's prints confirmed on Patricia Muse's stamp storage case. Price objected twice during the presentation. Both objections were overruled. By the time Ms. Okafor sat down, the courtroom was completely silent. Victor took the stand. He still wore his composed expression, but it was working considerably harder now. I could see the strain at the edges of it. Price guided him through his version of events carefully. Robert had confided in him privately. Robert had trusted him with the business because he genuinely worried about leaving his wife and daughter to manage something so demanding alone. The will update had been entirely Robert's idea, Victor said. Then Ms. Okafor stood for cross-examination. He began with a single simple question. Mr. Chen, can you tell this court the name of the document service where you claim your brother signed the updated will? Victor named a business on Clover Street. A small document office he described as professional and well-established. Thank you, Ms. Okafor said. She turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit H. Official business closure records confirming that the office on Clover Street Victor Chen just named had been permanently closed for 11 months before the date printed on the contested will. The room shifted almost physically. Price rose to object. Judge Wren raised one calm hand to stop him. She looked directly at Victor over her reading glasses. He looked back at her for one long moment. Then he looked down at the table. In that small, quiet moment, that specific dropping of the eyes, every single person present understood what had happened. Not officially yet. Not in formal legal terms. But with complete clarity. Judge Wren delivered her ruling the following Tuesday. Ms. Okafor called me at 9 in the morning. I was at the diner where I still worked the early shift. I stepped outside into the cool air to take the call. The contested will has been ruled invalid, she said. Fraudulent execution, forged notarization, and signature inconsistencies. All 3 grounds were upheld by the court. I sat down on the curb outside the diner door. The original will is fully reinstated, she continued. The estate of Robert Chen is to be distributed according to that document. The business, the building, and all associated assets are returned equally to Linda Chen and Maya Chen. I pressed the phone hard against my ear. Victor has also been referred to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation, she added. The stamp theft and document forgery findings have been formally forwarded. Thank you, I said. My voice came out much smaller than I expected. Why, Ms. Okafor paused deliberately. You built this case. You were patient when patience was the hardest possible choice. You protected everyone who helped you along the way. You did this the right way. I looked out at the ordinary street. A regular Tuesday morning. Cars passing. Someone walking a dog on the far side. I called my mom. She answered before the first ring even finished. I said 3 words, "We got it." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then I heard her crying at the kitchen table, the way people cry when something heavy finally lifts. Chen's auto is ours again. We officially took back full control 4 months after the ruling, once all legal transfers were completed and Victor's appeals ran out. He didn't win a single one of them. The first thing my mom did was restore my dad's name above the garage door. The real sign handwritten in the same bold style he had always used. We had a local artist reproduce it carefully from an old photograph we found in a storage box. The second thing we did was contact every employee Victor had let go and offer their jobs back. 5 of the original 8 returned. Marcus is still there. He has been at that shop for 24 years now. I gave him a meaningful raise on his first day under our management. He looked at me like I had done something slightly embarrassing. That felt exactly right. The business is recovering steadily. Slowly, the way real things always recover. Old customers are returning one by one because word travels in a town like ours. Victor was formally charged with document fraud and theft. His case continues moving through the criminal courts. My mom sat in my dad's office chair for the first time last week. She looked at the shelves, new notebooks lined up now, 3 per year, the same system my dad always used, and she said quietly, "He would have loved watching you do this." I think about that every single day. My dad arrived here at 22 years old with $400 and a toolbox. He built something honest, lasting, and full of integrity. He believed the people around him would honor what he created. I made sure they did. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And drop a comment. I want to know, have you ever had to fight to protect something that rightfully belonged to you? Tell me your story.